The streets of Salt Lake City were quiet in the early morning hours. A thin layer of mist clung to the pavement, rolling through alleys and sidewalks like a silent ghost. The city was waking up, cars beginning to hum, coffee shops preparing for the morning rush. But for Max Melitzer, nothing changed. He sat on a worn-out bench in Pioneer Park, his fingers clutching the handles of a rusted shopping cart filled with his few belongings. Clothes, old newspapers, a half-empty water bottle, things that meant nothing to most people, but were everything to him. Max had been on the streets for years. The memories of his past life had faded like ink in the rain, leaving behind only the daily struggle to find food and a safe place to sleep. Some nights he stayed in shelters, but most of the time, he wandered from one part of the city to another. He had no destination, no plans, just survival. He wasn't always like this. There was a time when Max had a home, a family, and dreams. But that life had crumbled under the weight of bad luck, bad choices, and circumstances he never fully understood. Max ran a trembling hand through his unkempt gray beard as he looked at the people passing by, rushing to their jobs, their homes, their lives. They barely noticed him, just another ghost among the city's forgotten souls. But something was coming, something that would shake his entire world, something he never could have imagined. And as the sun rose over Salt Lake City, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Max Melitzer had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. People walked past Max Melitzer without a second glance, just as they always did. He was invisible to them. A shadow on the streets, a man with no name, no past, no future, But today was different. A man in a dark blue jacket stood at the edge of the park scanning the area. He wasn't homeless. His shoes were polished, his hair neatly combed, and he carried an air of quiet determination. David Lundberg had spent weeks searching for someone most people had forgotten. He checked the old, crumpled photo in his pocket one last time. A younger, healthier Max stared back at him. The man before him looked older, worn down by life, but it was him. Lundberg hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked forward. Max noticed him immediately. He could always tell when someone approached him for a reason. Was it a cop, a social worker, or worse, one of those people who like to mock the homeless, treating them like animals in a zoo? Max braced himself. "You're Max Melitzer, right?" The words hit like a jolt of electricity. Max's fingers tightened around the handle of his cart. Nobody called him by name anymore. "Who's asking?" Max's voice was rough, his eyes wary. Lundberg pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "My name is David Lundberg. I'm a private investigator. I've been looking for you." Max frowned. "Private investigator? Look, if this is about some shelter or—" "It's not," Lundberg interrupted gently. He lowered his voice. "This is important. It's about your family." Max's heart skipped a beat. Family. That word felt foreign, like something from another lifetime. What family? He hadn't heard from anyone in years. "Go away," Max muttered, turning back to his cart. Lundberg didn't move. "Max, listen to me. I need to talk to you. It's about your brother." Max's body stiffened. He turned his head slowly. "My brother?" His voice cracked barely above a whisper. Lundberg nodded. "Yes. There's something you need to know, but not here." For the first time in years, Max felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, not relief, fear. Something was wrong. And somehow, deep down, he knew that whatever this man was about to tell him would change everything. Max's hands were shaking. He didn't know if it was from the cold or from the stranger's words. His brother. The word echoed in his mind like an old song he had almost forgotten. It felt distant, out of place, like something that belonged to a past life. He licked his cracked lips. "What about my brother?" Lundberg hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We should sit somewhere quieter. Maybe grab a coffee?" Max let out a bitter laugh. "A coffee? Man, I don't know who you are, but I don't do charity." "This isn't charity," Lundberg said. It's personal. There was something about his voice, steady, firm. He wasn't trying to pity him. He wasn't trying to sell him anything. Max studied him, then sighed. Fine. They walked to a small cafe a few blocks away. Max didn't go inside places like this often. The warmth of the heater, the smell of fresh bread, it felt like a world he no longer belonged to. Lundberg ordered 2 coffees and slid one across the table. Max took it, warming his hands against the cup. Now talk, Max muttered. What's this about? Lundberg took a deep breath. Your brother, he passed away. The words sliced through the air like a knife. Max froze. He stared at Lundberg, waiting for him to take it back. But he didn't. His brother was dead. The world around him blurred. He gripped the coffee cup tighter, his knuckles turning white. When? Max's voice was hoarse. A few months ago. Max swallowed hard. He hadn't spoken to his brother in years, not because he didn't care, but because life had pulled them apart. And now it was too late. He felt something rising in his chest, grief, regret, anger. Lundberg watched him carefully. There's something else. Max exhaled sharply. What? What else could there be? Lundberg leaned forward. He left you something. Max blinked. Left me something? Lundberg nodded. Yes, an inheritance. Silence. Max sat back in his chair. He stared at Lundberg like he had just spoken in another language. Then he laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. Man, you got the wrong guy. You're Max Melitzer, Lundberg said. Your brother left you an inheritance, a substantial one. Max shook his head. No way, my brother wouldn't, he couldn't, He trailed off, his mind racing. For years he had nothing. And now suddenly someone was telling him he had something? It didn't make sense. His hands trembled, his heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in years he felt something he never expected to feel again. Hope. Max sat frozen in the cafe, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. The words inheritance and substantial hung in the air like ghosts, circling his mind, refusing to settle. This had to be a mistake. Listen, man, Max muttered, shaking his head. I don't know what kind of scam this is, but I don't have a brother who'd leave me anything. We haven't spoken in years. Lundberg remained calm. I understand why this is hard to believe, but I wouldn't have spent weeks looking for you if I wasn't sure. Your brother passed away in New York. He left instructions in his will. His assets go to you. Max blinked. His what? Assets, Lundberg repeated. Money, property, a real inheritance. Max felt his pulse hammering in his ears. This didn't happen to people like him. He had spent years sleeping under bridges, pushing a cart filled with junk, eating from trash cans on his worst days. People like him didn't inherit things. People like him were forgotten. He clenched his fists. And how much are we talking about? Lundberg hesitated. I can't give you the exact number yet, but it's enough to turn your life around. Max scoffed. Turn my life around? He gestured at his ragged clothes, his matted hair. Do I look like someone who just gets a second chance? Lundberg's expression didn't change. Maybe it's time you did. Max looked away, his mind racing. Could this be real? Could he actually have a way out of this life? He tried to remember his brother's face. It had been so long. They weren't always close, but there was a time when they were just 2 kids, dreaming of better things. And now, this? He rubbed his temples. If this is real, why now? Why didn't anyone come looking for me before? Lundberg sighed. Your family lost track of you. They searched, but he hesitated. You know how it is. Sometimes people fall through the cracks. Max felt something twist in his chest. He was a crack. He had convinced himself long ago that no one was looking for him, that nobody cared. And now, out of nowhere, this. He drummed his fingers on the table. So, what's the catch? No catch. Max narrowed his eyes. There's always a catch. Lundberg folded his hands. The only thing standing between you and that inheritance is whether you're willing to accept it. Max let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Willing to accept it? It sounded simple. But after years of living the way he had, the idea of stepping into something good felt impossible. He wasn't sure he remembered how to want more. His hands shook as he lifted his coffee cup, staring into the dark liquid like it held the answers. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrifying thought whispered, what if this isn't a mistake? What if this is real? Max sat in silence, his mind tangled in a web of doubt and disbelief. Could this really be happening? For years, his world had been defined by street corners, shelters, and long nights in the cold. Now, suddenly a stranger was telling him that somewhere out there, a life with security, a real future, was waiting for him. He wanted to believe it, but belief was a dangerous thing. What if I say no? Max asked, his voice low. Lundberg tilted his head. Why would you? Max exhaled sharply. Because nothing in my life has ever gone right. Because I don't trust things that seem too good to be true. Because I wouldn't even know what to do with something like this. Lundberg studied him for a moment before speaking. Max, I get it. You've been out here for a long time. And when you've lived on the streets this long, trust isn't easy. He leaned forward, his voice steady. But this isn't a trick. It's a fact. Your brother left this for you. Max swallowed hard. His brother, the one person who still remembered him. Something in him cracked just a little. He took a deep breath. If I say yes, what happens next? Lundberg nodded, as if this was the moment he had been waiting for. We go to New York. Max let out a short, bitter laugh. New York? Man, I can barely afford a bus ride across town. You think I can just hop on a plane? Lundberg reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table. Your ticket's already taken care of. Max stared at it like it might explode. Why are you doing this? He muttered. Because it's my job, Lundberg replied simply. And because someone out there wanted you to have this chance. Max hesitated. Could he really do this? Could he step out of the life he had known for so long and into something unknown? The streets were hard, but at least they were familiar. This was terrifying. His hands trembled as he picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the ticket inside. A way out, a way forward. For the first time in years, he let himself imagine something different. A hot meal, a warm bed, a place where he wasn't just another forgotten soul. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to figure out who he was before he became the man pushing a shopping cart through the streets. Max took a deep breath and met Lundberg's eyes. Okay. Lundberg gave a small smile. Good choice. As they stepped out of the cafe and into the streets, Max realized something strange. For the first time in years, he wasn't just wandering anymore. He had somewhere to go. The hum of the airplane felt distant, like a dream. Max Melitzer was on his way to New York. He kept his hands clenched around the armrests, his stomach uneasy, not from fear of flying, but from the weight of everything that had happened. Less than 24 hours ago, he was pushing a shopping cart through the streets of Salt Lake City. Now he was thousands of feet in the air, heading toward a future he never saw coming. He glanced at the man beside him. Lundberg was flipping through a folder, making calls, handling details. This was just a case for him. But for Max, it was the biggest moment of his life. He pressed his forehead against the window, watching the clouds roll by. Was this really happening? For years, he had convinced himself that no one was looking for him, that no one cared. He had disappeared from the world, and the world had let him go. But his brother hadn't. Max squeezed his eyes shut. Why had he waited so long? Why hadn't he picked up the phone, written a letter, something? Now his brother was gone, and Max would never get the chance to say. He swallowed the thought and focused on what lay ahead. By the time they landed in New York, Max felt exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. But there was no time to rest. Lundberg led him straight to a law office in Manhattan, where the truth of his inheritance was finally revealed. Max sat in a leather chair across from a serious-looking attorney. The room smelled of paper and expensive wood polish. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Melitzer," the attorney said. Max still wasn't used to being addressed that way. He nodded stiffly. The attorney folded his hands. "Your brother left you everything. His savings, his assets. It's all yours now." Max's breath hitched. "And how much is everything?" The attorney slid a document across the table. Max hesitated before looking down. His hands shook as he read the number. 6 figures, around $100,000. He blinked, read it again. His throat felt tight. This can't be right." Lundberg gave a small nod. "It is." Max let out a shaky breath. He had spent years begging for spare change, collecting cans for nickels and dimes. Now he had more money than he had ever seen in his life. His mind raced. What did he do now? He could get an apartment, a warm bed, a real life. But a strange fear curled in his chest. What if he screwed this up? What if he wasn't meant for this? The attorney handed him a pen. "All you have to do is sign, and it's yours." Max stared at the paper. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. He thought of his brother, the kid who used to race him to the dinner table, the teenager who helped him sneak into baseball games, the man who, even after all these years, hadn't forgotten him. Max closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and picked up the pen. He wasn't homeless anymore. Weeks later, Max sat on the balcony of his new apartment, a cup of coffee in his hands. The city stretched before him, alive and bustling. He had a roof over his head, a fresh start, a second chance. But more than that, he had proof that he hadn't been forgotten. And for the first time in a long, long time, he believed he had a future.